All right. So thanks everybody definitely for joining us. These are certainly interesting times that we're in right now. And so to carve out a little bit of time out of your day is certainly meaningful to us. We appreciate it. We hope everyone on your team is doing well and healthy. We're going to have a brief discussion today. We want to hopefully impart some information on you that helps inform decisions that you are either planning to make or just things to consider around remote working. And this really stems out of a research project that we did in conjunction with Leesman and the Feline Research Institute last year, where we looked at credit unions exclusively at the workplace and the workplace experience. And some things specific to remote working came out of that we thought would be super relevant now, obviously, because of what we're dealing with the pandemic. So we've assembled a team here today that we'll hope will be entertaining, and we know they're very knowledgeable, with the exception of my colleague Mark. But we have joining us from the Leesman team, Racha Kamal and Maddie Dow. From Momentum, Mark Allgard and myself, and I'm Michael Downs. And from Sound Credit Union, Wendy Cleveland, out of Tacoma, Washington, who's the EVP and Chief Operating Officer. And she's going to share some of her insights of what they have seen and experienced as it relates to the pandemic and remote working and decisions that they're thinking about going forward. So where we're going today, again, conversational. We would love to be able to put everybody on video. It might get a little bit cluttered, but Mark's going to be talking about how we transition or how credit unions can think about transitioning from this current crisis mode to more of a long-term strategy. And then Racha and Maddie are going to talk about the data and dive a little bit deeper into that and how that can maybe help inform remote work decisions and the impact on the workplace. And then Wendy and I are going to have a little bit of a chat. I'm going to ask her some questions and pick her brain a little bit, and then we'll leave you with some final thoughts. So just as a housekeeping note, we do have everybody on mute. If you have questions, send something through in chat, and we're going to hang around a few minutes after the presentation and we'll answer those. If for some reason you need to go, we completely understand. We will send out the slides or a link to the slides, as well as questions to anything that comes in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let him take you through a few things.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for joining us. So I think, like you said, Michael, what we're trying to do here is help credit unions transition from, I'll call it crisis mode, but the current situation where organizations are likely dealing with some problems with even temporary coping mechanisms, right? To some more permanent work from home or distributed work solutions. We believe that the return to normal in the corporate office environment is probably farther out than many of us realize, and that even some organizations and workers will likely make a permanent shift to remote work settings. So, and I think in particular, you could think about some of our more vulnerable populations. We might not see some of those worker groups come back to the office even until there's a vaccine for COVID-19. So yeah, we're trying to transition from the kind of reactive stage to a more a proactive stage in work from home. So, and I'm assuming most of you have already instituted some best practices in your response to COVID-19, identifying essential people, employees, reviewing leave policies, point people. We're going to do our best to kind of steer clear of the best practices that have been published almost ad nauseum around how to deal with the current crisis. I will say that if you're looking for some tips on how to prepare the home office for a return of workers, things like how do you maintain social distancing in the office? How do you think about engineering controls that could help minimize the spread of COVID? Other policies, impacts to furniture, et cetera. We're not going to get in that today either, but there's some great resources out there, particularly Cushman Wakefield has a great white paper on this topic. So we'll get a link to that white paper added to the presentation for maybe facilities managers, people who might want to think more about those types of questions. So to kind of get in more to our recommendations here, I think first thing we can do right now is observe what's going on with our teams, and can pretty much guarantee that our teams are already kind of generating solutions to the problems and the challenges that they're finding working from home. So just observe what's going on, because from there, I think you can build on what's good and use those as a foundation for more permanent solutions to your problems. And I think that in particular, as social beings, we may underestimate how important personal connection is in the workplace, like how important that water cooler effect is. And I think that's probably one area where you're observing your employees start to create some new norms or new situations to kind of overcome that loss of camaraderie. And I think I want to ask Wendy real quick. I hope I'm not springing this on you, but do you have any observations around this in your office at Sound Credit Union?
Yes, in fact, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we've gotten from newly remote workers is they miss that social interaction. People who thought, oh, I wish I could work from home, are realizing it's not all it's cracked up to be. And to your point about coming up with their own solutions, we've had teams report back that they're doing team lunches over venues like Zoom, where everybody logs in, turns on their camera, and just has lunch and catches up about the family and what's new in their lives, as they would in the workplace, being physically together. We've even heard reports of not credit union endorsed happy hours.
Yeah, we have one every week. So yeah, we do endorse those. But yeah, I understand. There's some norms. I'm actually going to talk a bit about some of the norms that maybe credit unions should think about relaxing just a bit when it comes to work from home, just to make things a little bit easier for everybody, and I think create an environment of more empathy. But I know Rasha is going to talk about this as well. It might be the biggest challenge in work from home is maintaining that social connection between employees. I'll call it a social connection, but what it really is, I think, is it's a pathway for trust and good conversation and good collaboration, frankly, and engagement. So it's good to hear, I think, that you guys have that going on. And I think that would be one area for credit unions to observe their teams and really understand what they're doing to kind of get over some of the challenges. A couple other things, I want to hit on around observation. One is just, I heard the term radical candor, but really I think a good way to observe is to ask your managers to really ask your teams, what's going on? How is your work from home setting working for you? What problems are you having? I've even heard of team members giving each other tours of their work from home environments. And because what this does, again, is create a sense of empathy and understanding that not everybody has the luxury of a private office to work out of at their home. In fact, I think some younger people might be working in an apartment with roommates. And so that's one of those reasons why, this radical candor and openness might lead you to the conclusion that you might need to relax some of the norms and rigidity around the way people work for things to work well for everybody. Another thing I think you could look at is meeting frequency and duration. I think that early statistics are that meetings are going up in frequency and down in duration, which would be good. It means people are connecting more efficiently. But what you have to also look at for problems with meeting fatigue, right? And also maybe impacts on productivity or people partially paying attention to meetings and those things, right? So again, talk to your teams and understand maybe what is the right rhythm and setup for these meetings to work well. And then I think another thing to look at in terms of problems are just disruptions, problems with ergonomics, with having the right tools. I think we'd recommend even providing teams with some sort of a stipend, team members to purchase tools that may help them have a better work from home experience. And lastly, I think maybe look at differences between different departments or different roles or grades in the organization. So for example, how is this new environment working for the marketing team versus the call center, right? Document that information now, it'll help you plan in the future. And one more item, observe the work-life balance. Are people starting to get a sense that they're constantly on, that their workday is lengthening? Or on the flip side, are people finding that they have more flexibility and they have more freedom because of maybe less time spent commuting to and from the office? So, so after doing the observation, I think clearly, when things settle a bit, the credit unions will have a time and an opportunity to step back a bit and think about what you need for the credit union to be successful longer term. And I think you want to start by, as always, think about your objectives. So where does innovation fit in? Think about how different teams contribute to innovation in the organization. Think about internal and external relationships. You'll want to consider, of course, your membership in the community and how work from home could impact those areas of the business. And I mean, lastly, think about compliance, security, those more the process and operations side of the business, and how well that can or could maybe not work in a remote setting. Couple that with thinking about your culture. And so your culture, again, I mentioned this idea of being always on and work-life balance. You want to think about how those things are impacting the organization. You want to think about collaboration, connection, how I think, Michael, I might ask you to go back a slide. I think you got a little ahead of me there. I'm sorry about that. Your culture, again, not just like work-life balance, but having a thriving employee team, right? Could a work from home strategy actually help your employees thrive more? And I think one way to kind of work through these options you have both around your strategy and around your culture is maybe to do some scenario planning. So the way you do that really is maybe take a theoretical scenario. You're going to have the whole marketing team work from home on initiatives for the next year. Identify what are the positive things maybe that could come out of that. What are your objectives for the team? What are some of the risks and downsides of having the team work remotely? And then ask yourself, try to almost be in that situation and determine if that is a viable opportunity or not for the credit union. If it is, then maybe you define some of your next steps towards making that scenario a reality. All right, so just on to the third slide there, Michael. I'm gonna give you just a few final thoughts before I move on to Rasha. In implementing a work from home plan, I think really important is to do an unbiased data-based assessment of the situation. What tools you have, what work is important to people, what works well and what doesn't work well. And I think that's really where Leisman and Rasha are going to help you think about how to do an assessment like that. Another, recommendation is to create rituals. So your team will feel more grounded, I think, and more connected if you have rituals around the way people interact. So those coffee meetings or lunch meetings, but also how managers perform one-on-ones, or teams have team check-in meetings, or even company-wide types of check-ins. I want you to think about, I think this is a really big challenge, is when you transition to having the team part in and part out, or mostly in and part out, how are you going to maintain the connections between the team members? Because right now we're all forced to work from home and connect remotely. When we're not forced to do so, how are we going to make those people who are working from home, perhaps a vulnerable population, how are we going to make them still feel like they're in the loop with what's going on in the organization? And I think, just to kind of wrap this up, your work from home team members, I think, should be able to expect the same great experience that you want to provide your home office. The office is working in the corporate headquarters, right? You want to create that same sort of great experience. And so think about how you can do that. A stipend for home tools, but I think even more, making sure your managers in the home office are fair and equal with their time, and they're still connecting with those people who are working remotely. I'm going to now hand this off to Rasha, and I think she's going to talk a bit more about some of the data we've collected around credit unions and their workplaces and how you can kind of leverage that.
Thanks, Mark, and everyone for joining us. So just cautious of time, I'm going to run through things quite quickly. Michael's going to share with you the slides, as he mentioned, with my contact details and Mari. If you wish to go through any of those numbers in a one-on-one session, just shout and send us an email. So just a bit of background very quickly on what Leaseman does and who we are. So we present ourselves to be the radiographers of the industry. We have developed a tool which is now the global largest workplace efficiency tool with a standardized study 10 years ago. And currently it sits at over 740,000 responses that have taken that study. So as you can imagine, we have a very good granular understanding of what works and what doesn't work in the office. So when this pandemic hit, we had a lot of our clients that came approaching us asking for data and evidence on capturing what's currently happening. And the more, I guess, interesting conversation came from a client based in Asia who said, can you provide us with any data whatsoever for us to be ahead of the game and understand what are the lessons learned from home working and from the reality of what COVID has done really to the economy and to the reality of workplace experience in Asia, so we can implement that and learn from it in North America and Europe because of the reality of the virus and how it was spreading. And we're like, actually, we have a lot of data, but not enough on home working. So we decided to mobilize a tool to be able to capture those, the knowledge and make sure that with the journey that everyone's going through now, and more importantly, when we come back to the office, we have hard evidence on what's worked and what hasn't, rather than just speculate and use anecdotes on what the office is going to look like. So once again, we're really just positioning ourselves as the radiographers of the best possible employee experience, whether it was from home or in the office. So when we were designing that tool, we decided to look at some of the numbers that we currently have in our database. And this was a really alarming one. So more than half of the global employees have no home work experience whatsoever. The good news from this, I would say, is that we're all in this together. Like, there's no particular industry that's doing it better than another. Everyone is learning, and this has really knocked everyone out of the park significantly. So and hence why we've created this global initiative. We want to learn from each other. So if you go to the next one, I'll touch on just the methodology of the tool, which basically covers many of the points that Mark was just talking about earlier. So first and foremost, we ask the employee how they're feeling within their homework experience right now. So we get a good sense of their personal sense of productivity, the connectivity, which we're seeing, as Mark mentioned, to be a massive element that has really taken a dip. So the connectivity to the organization and to your colleagues. So it's great to hear that Wendy and her team are doing some really cool stuff to maintain that. We then ask about their activities. So once again, as we do in the office survey, we get a good understanding of what people are doing. And given that the questions here and activities is the same in our home study as our office study, it allows us to see the switch and the support, and where some activities are being more supported from home versus the office. And the combination of these two then give us the HLMI, so the Home Leesman Index score. And it's a score that is very quickly developing to be, once again, a global benchmark for home working. So we're currently sitting at around 6,000 responses and growing as we go. So we will be launching or publishing those results very soon. So definitely stay tuned on that. The second part, sorry, just one more. Sorry, Michael. Second part of the survey is asking about the features. So what are the things that they're using, and if we're supporting them, whether it was the desks, the tables, or more tech facilities, which are playing a massive role right now, monitors, mobile equipment, audio headsets, etc. And lastly, my favorite part of the survey is the demographics. It really allows you to go into the nitty-gritty side of the results for your organization and the global database. So we ask about the functionality of the user, and more importantly, we ask about the reality of their home environment. So are you sharing it with anyone? And if so, is it your flatmates, your friends, your partner, kids, etc.? So now we can go to the next one. And very quickly, yes, the objective of this is to ensure that the global community has a toolbox of taking, I guess, the marks of this test that everyone's going through, and making sure that we're applying those once as we plan for our return to the office strategy. And we've been hearing a lot about people saying, you know, we want to phase out things and have certain groups of people return to the office. So what we want to provide you with is the tools that you need to know who can go to the office before the other, whether it was based on their age group or their functionality or which city they're based in. So if you move on to the next slide, I added this last minute actually based on a conversation we were having with Wendy. And the point of this is to just acknowledge that there's a lot that's out of our control right now. There's a lot that's happening with the economy, and there's a lot of anxiety with people, like whether they're going to keep their jobs or not. So with the next section of what we're going to cover is we want to arm you with the tools and the data that you need, so you know what are the bits that you can control and influence in order to increase your employees' experience and maintain it on a high level and provide them with the support that they need. As well. So the data set that we're going to touch on, Mari and I, that's based on a study that we did with Momentum and Feline last year. It consisted of 10 credit unions, one of which is South Credit Union, and it resulted to over 1,300 responses across 22 buildings. So the average score for those credit unions is 64.4, which is slightly above the global average. And that was for the office survey. So I'm diving into the results that we have from the office right now, and to see how that can inform the home experience. So we looked at the global number. Now we're looking at credit unions. Over 77% of the employees said that they've never had homework working experience. Dive deeper into that. That's one of the really interesting ones for me. So we noticed that there's 46% of the employees that sat in enclosed offices in comparison to, next drum roll, Michael, 21.7 in the global benchmark. And then if we go to the next slide, we have 38% in private offices for credit unions in comparison to around 9% in the global benchmark. So what we're seeing here is the conversation we were having at the time when we saw those numbers is how are we going to manage the anxiety and the uncertainty for people as they change into flex working. And at the time, we didn't have the virus to worry about. Now, that worry has increased significantly. So I think in your particular, and in our particular position as credit unions, the risk here is that it's very different for your industry and your reality than other markets, and other industries, given the numbers that we've seen. So we want to be very, very, very careful of our reality. If we go one more next, thank you. And that's sort of tapping into the opportunity that you guys have. It's we don't really need to reinvent the wheel, and actually looking at those numbers, we see that 80%, just a little bit over 80% of the population say that they're not very mobile within the environment, their work environment. They're using 1 to 2 different work settings. So that helps us in a way with social distancing, knowing that the majority of our employees don't require a variety of different types of work settings. Therefore, we can sort of try and control that and make them feel safe a little bit more, given their needs. So I'll hand over to Mari for some more meaty information.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rasha. I'll run through this fairly quickly. So just deep diving a little bit further into some of these survey responses. So the same respondents and organisations that Rasha mentioned, we do a lot around work activities. So just pulling out a couple of interesting collaboration activities here. We can safely assume that given this was taken last year, that the importance of some of these has risen, and also probably the level to which they are supported with at home. The really interesting one here is obviously at the bottom with the informal unplanned meetings that are not particularly well supported in the office, and that comes down to that sort of ad hoc interaction, whether it's water coolers, kitchens, etc., etc. So this is where we would start to suspect that mental health might be suffering somewhat, and then also linking back to those first 3 collaboration activities. If you jump to the next slide. Thank you. We can see here that even previously, both audio and video were not very well supported. Now, of course, they weren't necessarily as important necessarily in the office with a lot of things happening face to face, but now that they are, and virtually our entire lives are based on these 2 items, we can only assume that they are impacting those collaboration activities that I mentioned before. So really interesting to look at sort of the links there as well. One other thing that is coming through in the data already from the 6,000 responses that we do have is that learning from others and connectivity are both suffering significantly. So as Rasha said, we will be publishing that in the coming weeks a little bit more, but that's coming through loud and clear. So we know that they're both areas which understandably are suffering. Finally, just looking at some of the features. So printing and scanning is an interesting one, as that consistently across all of our surveys globally comes up as the second most important feature, yet is often not that well supported. So we can only assume that people are either very frustrated or are being forced to go digital, which maybe environmentally is a good thing, who knows. But it's also worth noting that our studies show that up to around 38% of people don't have a dedicated space to work from at home. I know it's been mentioned before, flatmates. I'm currently in my bedroom, as you can see. I've got a flatmate out watching TV. It's evening here in London. So lots and lots of issues there. So that, along with, connectivity to VPN and a bunch of other things are really suffering as well. So this information is really, really relevant, and obviously you can have a bit more of a look through, as I believe these slides will be sent around afterwards. So just a quick run through there, and I'll pass back to Michael and Wendy. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Maddie. All right. So Wendy, are you there? Obviously living in one of the areas that was hit pretty significantly early on. I know you scrambled and had to address some things earlier than some of the other areas of the country. I'd be curious, what percentage of your workforce was working remote prior to COVID?
Yeah, it was single digits. We had less than 5% working remotely full-time. If you include people who did it maybe 1 day a week, you get upwards of only 7%. Now we're well over 30%. Of course, we're really focused on the back office there primarily because it's not as realistic for branch staff.
Yeah. And as I know you alluded to earlier, kind of the team connection or social interaction, now that you're over 30% remote, what are some of the things that you and the team are observing that maybe you didn't think of, or any surprises around that you're learning?
Well, I think one of the things, other than the social interaction, is keeping up morale. And it really doesn't just go to remote workers. It's for everyone during these trying times. But remote workers right now have challenges that they may not have in the future. For instance, many don't have childcare right now. And so they're trying to do double duty, working at home and homeschooling or even regular childcare, which wouldn't be a typical work from home scenario. So we're trying to give employees a lot of grace in terms of their productivity right now, because it's not truly reflective of what a remote work arrangement could be.
Yeah. So with those things in mind, and obviously everything's kind of been a whirlwind and we're still, very much in it, but as you and the team look forward, and I believe you said you're having weekly internal meetings via Zoom, or maybe even more frequently than that, but as the leadership team thinks about the future, what are some of the things that you're considering, not just specifically with remote working, but just in general, operationally, when we get post-COVID, if you will, whenever that may be?
We're looking at it from a short-term standpoint. Of course, how is our state going to reopen, and how will we respond to that? So we're doing scenario planning in that regard, but then also longer term. This has been more of an experiment than we planned on when it comes to remote work. And some positions, as Mark indicated earlier, will be very well suited for that. Some people are more suited than others for that. Some of our leaders may be more comfortable or skilled at managing a remote workforce than others. So what tools do we need to put in place as an employer? What assessments do we need to make to find those roles and those individuals? We're initially going to, in a phased approach, bring everyone back to the office with our high-risk employees coming back last, if at all. And our first step in assessment is talking to our leaders now to identify those roles and employees that they think would be most conducive, at least on a part-time basis, because when we bring people back, we're going to need those social distancing measures in place. And that might involve some creativity, because our current corporate office isn't necessarily designed for that in all areas. So to bring everyone back at the same time may not work. And so there may be options like shared workspaces, where one employee works Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the office, and Tuesdays and Thursdays at home. Their counterpart that shares the same workstation in the office has the opposite schedule.
That's pretty interesting. And I was surprised to read lately that those types of shared workstations are actually a lot cleaner than people's individual workstations. So provided that there's a policy around, keeping them free of any clutter, and that your cleaning team's instructed to, because most office cleaners don't clean the individual workstations, right? But yeah, that was a surprise to me to learn that was actually probably a good strategy for social distancing. So
that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought it was cleaner, so that's good to know. I'll take that back to the rest of the executive team.
I read that on average, the bathroom is cleaner than people's individual desks. So you can dig into that.
Oh.
One other quick question, Wendy. I know in talking to you, some that I thought was interesting that you might want to share is, obviously you don't want to lose sight of what's best for the members. And I know you had talked about that's going to be an important factor in determining what everything looks like in terms of what the requirements are based on how members want to be served. So maybe you can speak to that just real quickly, because I thought that was pretty compelling.
Sure. We're doing more video with our members and looking at how we can serve members more remotely in the future. Like many other credit unions, we've shut down our branches where they're appointment only right now and drive-through. We're carefully analyzing all of our digital channels to monitor for behavioral changes that may last into the future and looking at where we can respond accordingly.
That's great. Well, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing those insights. I'm gonna, Mark, I think you had a couple final thoughts, and then we also have included at the end of this presentation some additional resources that might be helpful. We are gonna send this out, as I said, to all the attendees. But Mark, if you wanna just kind of wrap things up a little bit, we're slightly over, but we're fine.
Well, I think, you know, because I'd like to get to the Q&A. So I think a couple final thoughts, and they are kind of around the return to the office, the home office, and what you can do to prepare. One is what we would call engineering controls. Some of the research and early research out of China and elsewhere that I've read is that making adjustments to your HVAC system and drastically increasing the amount of outside air that's coming through, changing and upgrading filters, and increasing the humidity in your workspace can go a long way towards creating, I'll say, healthier air in the environment. And that might not be something everybody is aware of. So I wanted to mention that. The second item was the kind of thoughts around shared desking, and that maybe that would be a pretty valid option for credit unions who, I know in a lot of their environments, people sit pretty close, and you're going to be looking at how do we have every other station open. Well, if people are sharing stations, I think coupled with a good cleaning program and policies around just no personal items pretty much whatsoever, that can work well. And I think that is, you know, I'm picturing myself walking around your office, Wendy, and I know that, you know, social distancing in the office will be a challenge, right? So you may need help from people in doing space planning. That's something we've been offering up to some of our clients as just kind of a value-added, you know, service, right? Just giving folks a hand with laying out their offices for a temporary situation, so that you can really have it down on paper where people are going to sit and kind of validate that there's enough space. It's kind of hard to do with the pencil and paper sometimes. So, yeah, that was really it. I appreciate everyone coming together on this topic. I think it's really, you know, I hate to say fascinating. It is fascinating. We're, you know, responding to such a dire situation at the same time. But I think it was interesting in our conversations preparing for this that there's so many silver linings and opportunities that keep, you know, surfacing. So I love a conversation like this. So thank you. Yeah,
and if you have questions, submit them through chat, or you can certainly email any of it. This is by no means an exhaustive list of resources, but some quick ones that we think certainly you'll find value from. We have a pretty extensive list, and to Mark's earlier point, I know everyone's getting bombarded with COVID-19 related content in their inbox, so it can be a little bit overwhelming, but some of these might give you some nuggets of info that help you as you go forward. So if anyone has any questions, I know we're a little bit over the allotted time, but we're happy to hang and answer some questions if you want to submit them via chat. Not an avalanche yet.
I don't know, Wendy, if you have any questions for us or maybe for Rasha and what you saw in her presentation.
You know, Racha, a lot of the data that you presented was so interesting, and it was pre-COVID. Do you have any plans of repeating the study now?
Yeah, certainly. So the tool that we've developed is basically to solve the problems that we're currently going through amid COVID, and it focuses on home working. So the current database that we have is around 6,000 people. As that grows, we're going to publish that and also look at some of our office surveys, so pre-COVID, and see the difference in the gap there, and what are some of the sentiment shifts that have happened. The really interesting thing, actually, I obviously can't name the organization, but there's a couple of organizations that have already done the home survey with us and have equally done the office survey not too long ago for the same city, population. And we've seen a lot of switch in the importance of the activities. So for instance, relaxing, taking a break used to have a really high rank of importance, around 6 or so overall. It's now dropped and below the 10 most important activities. There's two different sides to this. It could be that people don't see the need to like actually actively think about relaxing and taking a break right now because they're working from home. But it could also mean that people are overworking and work-life balance is not doing so well, because it's very easy for you to just be taken with the work on day-to-day basis. And we've had numerous chats with clients who are saying actually they're millennials, the younger age group, are showing a lot of anxiety with that and less support and balance with work life because of the fact that they feel they need to prove themselves more. So they're constantly like waking up early and jumping on Zoom meetings just to show their faces and show their managers that they're doing work. So there's that constant feel of anxiety, like I need to prove that I'm doing work despite the fact that there's distance between myself and my manager. So there's a lot of those sentiment shifts that we're seeing already. And I think one of the really interesting things as well is once you break it down by departments, where we noticed that there's some functions that are getting more support with the type of equipment that is sent to them by their employer than others. So if you happen to be a trader and in a financial organization, sometimes you're sort of at the top of the list of being sent a monitor than someone else because you need it and because of the value that you're contributing to the organization financially. There's a lot of those type of controversial, if you like, sort of results that are coming up, and we're definitely going to launch them the next 2 weeks. Maybe it's time to do a webinar then again and look at them.
Yeah. I did have a quick question that came in. Racha, maybe you can quickly answer this. Is there a simple, immediate survey tool, or what tool do you recommend to kind of do a quick assessment for a credit union just on remote working? I kind of know the answer to this, but I want to let you answer it.
I would say least one, certainly, because we provide the breakdown by departments. That's sort of the difference between our tool and many others that are out there. You can dig further into your internal organization, and the reason why we do that is because of some of the questions that we were getting, like we need to phase people into going back to the office. So how can you know how to phase if you're not entirely sure who's working at home better than others, right? So what I'll do to this person is we can send you the demo survey, which is exactly the same type of survey that is sent to the employees, and you will get a really good sense of how like the questionnaire is designed. I would also say stay tuned, because we are launching something that will provide you, like once you do the survey online, it provides you with answers for yourself as an individual instantly, but not as an organization. So we're developing something like that as well.
Great. Well, great. Thank you again for everyone who's still hung around. We had quite a few people still hanging around, so thanks for tolerating us. Wendy, Racha, Mark, thank you everyone for your contributions. Wendy, it was a great conversation. Like I said, we'll be sending this out to everyone that attended. Hopefully there were a couple nuggets of info that will be helpful to you and your organizations. And certainly feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction or get you the resources that you might need. So with that, stay safe, stay healthy, and we wish everyone the best.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.